All right, thank you very much for the introduction, and just first, thanks to 350 Deschutes for inviting me here today, to talk about this topic of how we might be able to break through some of our beliefs or maybe even misconceptions about, what we can do to make our residential buildings, our homes, ready for the future and a more sustainable future. So first off, I want to just take care of a couple logistics. So I think one of the great things about this type of format is that you can actually ask questions through the chat functionality or through the Q&A functionality during a presentation. And so people can share information and ask me questions or share information with each other if you have additional resources. So please feel free to use those mechanisms during the talk. Diane and I will both be doing our best to monitor both those channels during the meeting. And so feel free to do that. And, I am hoping to be able to solicit a little bit of volunteer assistance during the meeting and some feedback as we go along. All right, so thank you. I'm here today, as this indicates, to try and find out for you or maybe your customers, maybe you're being held back or they're being held back from making some energy efficiency related or other energy related performance improvements to their homes or your home. So I'm going to be talking about basically how Earth Advantage with partners has worked on efforts around basically like improving the literacy for us as homeowners, home occupants, home buyers, and even for the finance industry in understanding what energy efficiency means in homes. Because it's not always as evident what energy efficiency is delivering for you as maybe what a recently remodeled kitchen or bathroom, for instance, is delivering for you. But it also doesn't have to be rocket science. Move to my next slide. And this is just a little call out, and I would actually use this time to encourage you to go to the presentation later by the 3 builders that are out there, building affordable zero energy homes. Myself, I come to this work because I started doing green building back in the 90s and was very fortunate that I got to work with a lot of great clients. And this one project in particular, back in 2003, 2004, this project was for a rocket scientist. He had worked at NASA and he and his wife were looking to build a small home to retire to. He basically said to me, well, if we could basically have zero energy buildings in space back in the 60s, it shouldn't be that hard for you to build us a little zero energy home in the 2000s. And, he was right. In the end, technically, those weren't the biggest challenges. It actually came to do more with, everybody else's perception of what they wanted to do. They wanted a house that would sort of align with their values of living sustainably. And it was actually hard to make the rest of the system work well for them. But that's my background, and I didn't come over to work to the nonprofit till about 2008. And so then where I work today and where I've been the executive director since 2012 is Earth Advantage. And many of you here in the Oregon market, you may know us for our green certification work that we do. We've certified about 20,000 homes in the last 20 years here in Oregon, and also about 20,000 multifamily units, working with our own certifications and others like LEED and Passive House and Energy Star. And you also may know us for the training that we do. We do have a professional training team, develop curriculum, deliver that for builders, realtors, appraisers, and lenders around the state in conjunction with partners like Energy Trust and Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. What a lot of you may not know is that, for over a decade, we've been doing research with national labs, piloting policy ideas around how do we get the value of better performing homes realized in the marketplace, and also technical aspects with labs as well. And that we've been piloting different types of policies with state governments, you know, from Alabama to Massachusetts around the country. You may also not know that we also are a nonprofit software developer that has built tools for the national labs and other green certification groups. And then we have our own software development products like the Green Building Registry, which I'll talk about later. So briefly, I like to share this slide with folks, just, you know, so people know what Earth Advantage's goals are. You have to read all the fine print, but basically it says we're working on a bunch of stuff to have midterm outcomes because we have a long-term goal. And our long-term goal is that by 2030, the standard practice for new construction in Oregon would be like the maximum level of energy efficiency, you know, that we know today to be cost effective. And that's being delivered for every new building from 2030 onward. There's some great work that's been done by the governor's team and other people supporting that now. And there's actually a whole coalition that we helped form called the Zero Energy Ready Oregon Coalition, which you might look into if you're interested in those kind of goals. But that's sort of the top half of this chart. And then the bottom half of the chart is simultaneously by 2030, we have a vision that every single real estate transaction that involves a building in the United States will actually take into account, you know, the energy efficiency, energy performance, and green related aspects of those properties. They'll just be part and parcel of every transaction, so that there's an opportunity for buyers, sellers, and appraisers and bankers to take all that into account. So that's our big vision, and that's what drives us to do the things that we do. Now, for today, just wanted to recap with everybody, you know, just like at the beginning of a job, every day on a construction job site, you know, you like to quickly review what the goals are for the day so that hopefully we can meet them. And today it's like, I'm hoping to point out that, as I mentioned before, there are some possibilities that you might not be aware of for improving energy performance in existing homes. You might understand the impacts disclosure policies are already having, like in our local market and other markets. You might understand there are some changes coming around mortgage finance that will perhaps add more value to the sharing of information. And then just resources about everything that we're talking about. I'll provide those at the end, so you have linkage if you want to, if you're viewing this after the live session, or if you want those resources later on today. So those are the goals. And now I'd like to get, you know, right into the right into the myth busting portion of the talk. So, you know, this is something that I've heard, you know, time and time again back from when I was a contractor doing remodeling and new construction in the 90s, all the way up until, you know, just in speaking with friends these days. You know, it was just a couple of years ago. I was our office is downtown Portland, you know, with the food carts nearby. So, you know, I ran into an old friend at the food carts one day, and she went on to tell me about all the remodel projects that she and her husband had been doing to this old house that they had. And she, you know, knows that my interests are around sustainability, and that has been my work for a long time. So after I heard about all the different projects, I did ask her, you know, well, did you do anything to reduce the energy consumption, you know, extra insulation or efficient equipment and things like that? And, you know, she just looked at me with that kind of a blank stare and said, well, you know, it's an old house. Like, you know, what can you do? And that, I think, is a general response that a lot of folks have. But, you know, there is a lot that you can do to older homes. In fact, this is one of the greatest sources of inefficiency that we still have in our economy. There are a lot of houses out there that still need the basics, whether that's attic insulation, wall insulation, air sealing, you know, or even sealing of ductwork. There's been great work done in Oregon over the years, typically through utility funded programs and also through weatherization programs, but there's still a lot more work to do. And a great way to get started on that in reality is to have somebody who does know old houses well, who knows about energy efficiency, to come to your house and actually talk to you about it and even give you, an assessment for something like that. So, the most in-depth option might be a home performance contractor. A good place to find those might be at the Home Performance Guild of Oregon is actually a group of contractors focused on that work. Also, Energy Trust of Oregon has a place you can find their trade allies who would be able to help you with that. Additionally, if you don't want somebody who might be trying to sell you something simultaneously, the state does have a pool of home energy score assessors who can come and do a basic assessment of your house. That'll let you know what improvements could be done. You can always also contact, your utility. They may have a representative that can come out and point out things that could be done. Or if you do qualify for low-income programs, you can contact a local community action agency. Typically, they'll have you go to an education course first, in person or probably online at this point now. But they'll have you attend an education course first, and once you've done that, you can get on their list to get heavily subsidized weatherization projects done on your house. So this house in this picture actually does have a story, though. This house is in my neighborhood, and I bike by it, or at least when I'm in the office, I bike by it on the way home, and it went up for sale a couple years ago. And at that point, the city of Portland's home energy score disclosure policy was already in effect as a way to educate buyers and sellers about the relative performance of homes. So this house, was listed, and in the listing it showed that it was a home energy score of 2 out of a possible 10, 10 being the best. It also turns out, in the house next door, a good friend of mine lives. And as I was biking by his house one day, he flagged me down, and he had noticed that this house had a home energy score of 2, and he knew that I was involved in that program. Earth Advantage does the quality assurance on that program for the city of Portland to make sure things are done consistently and accurately. And so he asked, hey, how could this be a 2? I mean, this seems like a good house. It seems like just as good as my house. I can't believe my house would be a 2. And he was worried, that it'd be harder to sell that house given that it was a 2 out of 10, or maybe it might be devalued. And then he immediately was just thinking, what does that mean for me in my house as well? So, that house in question, here's a look at what that home energy scorecard looked like for that house that broke it down. And, on that house, there was work that could be done. They had less than an inch of insulation in the attic. They had no insulation in the walls. They had no insulation in the floor or basement. The ductwork had never been sealed. They had an older electric water heater. So there was a series of recommendations there. And just the most cost-effective 4, which would all have a payback of less than 10 years, was showing savings of over $400 a year for that home if those measures were conducted. So that was a good example, for that individual house, one that I bike by every day. There was low-hanging fruit there that could be done. And the majority of homes in Oregon also have a similar situation. And here I'm going to share you some data that we know from the city of Portland. Here already 21,000 homes have been assessed in the first not quite 3 years of that policy. And to be honest, not every house that gets listed for sale in Portland actually follows the rules. Some of them are scofflaws and they don't get assessed, but the majority of them to date have been assessed. And this tells you the basic picture of this housing stock in Portland. So the typical home is around, a 4. That's the median value for homes in Portland, a 4 out of 10. That's what this left-hand graph is showing you. You can see there are a lot of ones because actually the ones is capturing a very wide array of energy performance. And then you can see it's basically just a sort of a general bell curve. that goes off and, you know, decreases because there aren't a lot of 8, 9s, and 10s. In fact, you know, there are about 35% of the homes fall into 1, 2, and 3 buckets combined right now. If you look to the right-hand side, and you'll see that on that side, that graph is actually showing you, oh, with those cost-effective as determined by the US Department of Energy with a 10-year payback or less, if you just did those measures and not any of the other ones, you know, the typical house would go from a 4 to a 7. The typical house with a 1 would go from a 1 to a 5. You can see you could shift the entire energy performance of the housing stock of your community if just things that would pay off in less than 10 years were done. So these, if you're financing a home with a 30-year mortgage or even a 20-year mortgage, even a 10-year mortgage, this is actually cost neutral or cost savings activity for the occupant of that house to undertake to do this work. There could be additional things you could do that would cost more, but this is actually going to save you money at the same time you're reducing carbon emissions and probably increasing the comfort of your home quite a bit as well. So an obvious question always comes up though, but yeah, is that just the really old homes? And maybe we don't, you know, maybe this is another part of Oregon and there aren't as many really old homes because the housing boom happened later. And there's a lot of homes from the 70s, for instance, or a lot of homes from the 50s. This graph's a little technical. It comes from a paper from a PhD candidate at Portland State University who also works for the National Lab, Pacific Northwest National Lab, Chrissy Antonopoulos. But in this paper, she was really doing a deep dive into this data set that exists in Portland. And what the left-hand graph is trying to tell you here is, hey, the average value and the low-performing homes that are found in this data set are pretty evenly spread around the city. You know, it's not starkly discolored from one end to the other, except for this one part, which is basically an industrial area covered in blue, so there might only be a couple data points there. What I want to sway you to look at is over on the right-hand side. These are actually distributions of houses by the different scores. So the very bottom bar are the 1s, the very top bar are the 10s, and as you move from left to right, you go from older homes to newer homes. And what you can really see when you're moving up from the score of 1 all the way up to the score of 6 is the distribution of the age of these homes is very similar. It's very similar. It's a bit tighter clustered at the bottom, but around, you know, not really old homes, but actually sort of more, you know, mid-century homes. And then as you go up, once you get to 7, 8, 9, and 10, those very top performing homes, then you do see a pattern where they do tend to be newer homes because those homes were all built to an energy code. Oregon's energy code went into effect in 1974. And so those homes are now going to have a basic level of insulation in them. And so that starts to move the needle on how these scores are distributed. I just think it's really important to note that even up in the 10 bar, you do have individual homes. We have multiple homes built before 1910 in Portland that are scoring a 10 on this scoring methodology. You don't have a lot of homes that are new that are scoring a 1, and you don't have a lot of homes that are from 1910 that are scoring a 10, but it is totally within the range of possibility. And I think it's just important to note that a lot of these homes, even when you're talking about 1950s homes, 1960s homes, 1970s homes, 1980s homes, even 1990s homes, there's still work that can be done to make them more energy efficient, lower their carbon emissions, and make them more comfortable. And that's what this slide is really speaking to, also from that same research study. And this is showing you that the clouds of red dots and the heat mapping of them is showing you the propensity of the need for different types of improvements in different parts of the city of Portland, for example, where we have all this data. And what it really shows you on the left-hand side is hey, that housing stock right up and down the middle, that is the older housing stock of Portland, the stuff that was built out pre-World War II, right? In most cases, but some infill housing later. And that's where you see a real need for insulation. You know, those houses were never built with insulation in the first place. If they have insulation, it's because somebody added it later. Like, I live in Portland. I can tell you, I have plenty of my neighbors who have no insulation at all in their homes, and they would show up as one of these red dots within the cloud. But you can see out on the east side, you know, there's a much lower propensity of little insulation, and the same thing on the west side. Those areas were built later where there was likely insulation installed. Interestingly, if you look at the right-hand side, this is really looking at your heating efficiency of your furnace or heat pump. And here, well, you might expect, oh, well, those older homes would also really be the ones we need to focus on for those kind of equipment upgrades. But in reality, those older homes are actually, by and large, in areas that have wealthier households who have been able to take advantage over time of incentive programs from utilities and upgrade their equipment. And you can see that the actual hotspots for equipment upgrades are actually out in the east side, where we have more of that mid-century housing that was built post-World War II through the 70s, even after that. Hotspots over there. And then, maybe very surprisingly for some folks, you see over here in the West Hills, where there was a development built out starting in the 80s, finished up in the early 2000s. But that was built out at a time when high efficiency equipment was not still the norm getting installed in homes. And these houses are getting old enough that you're looking at potentially replacing these systems now. That becomes an opportunity that, you know, a local program from a utility or a city or some sort of community group, they might want to do even some door-to-door work in that neighborhood to let people know, hey, like, when your furnace fails, you should look at this type of really efficient upgrade. So that's part of the data that's coming out of this. And that's a little bit of the myth busting right there, is that, you know, I don't think a lot of people would have guessed this is a hotspot for energy efficiency when people are still looking at that as relatively new housing in Oregon. So I'm going to jump from that really, you know, to the to the next myth. Well, if you found out, or some of you work with found out, you know, hey, there is a bunch of work that I could do, whether it's installation or equipment, like I really could improve the, you know, the performance of my home. And when I'm saying improve it, I mean, it's not just about lowering carbon emissions and being comfortable, it's also the bottom line dollars. When we were looking at those charts earlier, you know, the homes in the bucket of 1, 2, or 3, on average, they could save 27% on their utility bills. And if you're talking about the homes that were a 1, that big stack of homes that are in sort of that lowest performance level, on average, just by doing those low cost-effective measures, they could save $725 a year on average, that whole bucket in the middle. Okay. But yes, it's probably going to be too expensive is what you might be thinking. And, you know, part of this story is, you know, I'll just quickly tell you, you know, when I had that conversation with my friend that day outside this house on my way home, he said, well, I mean, it's going to cost him like $40,000, $50,000 to make that house more energy efficient. That's just ridiculous. It's not worth that. And he's a professional engineer, structural engineer. So he, you know, he thinks he knows what he's talking about when he says things like that. And, you know, so I brought up for him that label that I shared with you. And I said, well, you know, here's the improvements that it says could turn this from a low performing house into an average performing house, right? And I mean, now we're talking, these are not really expensive improvements that were on that list. I mean, here's just some ballpark pricing of what that might have cost. You know, on the left-hand side, if you're a household that just qualifies for regular incentives, say through Energy Trust, you might have been paying around $6,700. If you qualify for their savings within REACH program, where you get some additional incentives, lower that down to $6,400. And then if you actually fall to be income qualified for weatherization program through a community action agency, then like Neighbor Impact in Central Oregon, then your out-of-pocket costs might only be for that water heater. And that would only be $1,400. But the other elements of that, you wouldn't have to pay for at all. So this was, when I told this to my friend, and that these are the kind of things that really could move the needle for this house, before jumping into the more expensive things like putting solar on the roof or tearing their entire roof off and building a new roof that could fit more insulation in, he had no idea. And, his real response was like, well, why don't more people know about this if these are the type of solutions we're talking about? Because, this makes a lot of sense. And, that's a really good question. And, to me, it's because it's just not something we talk about. Like when we're talking about our homes, it's a lot easier to talk about things there's common understanding for: bathrooms, kitchens, closets, patios, things like that. The energy performance of a home is related to things like comfort, your monthly bills, even carbon impacts. But for most of us, we might only even think about our utility bills. And then most of the time, we kind of feel guilty about them because they're not lower than they currently are. We certainly don't really go around talking about them with other people. We don't really want to share those most of the time unless we're forced to share them. And then we want to put caveats around them. But since the disclosure policy went into effect in Portland in 2018, you'll actually hear casual conversation around energy performance. I was having, lunch downtown last year at a Thai restaurant, just, having my soup, minding my business. And I heard two people behind me having a discussion about the home energy score of the home that one of them had just purchased. It was an 8. So he felt pretty good about it, and telling his buddy, like, I don't think I have to do anything there for a while, feeling good about that. And then he was going on to talk about, what kind of electric car he was going to buy, because it was all a question about how they were, how their impact on the environment was. And that was really, interesting to hear. And separately, I was in a doctor's office recently and I was chatting with a nurse, the kind of conversation you have just past the time. And she asked what I did for work. I mentioned we handle this home energy score assurance work, and she just lit up. She told me she and her husband had just finished, purchasing a home after searching for many months. And she said, actually, like, having this home energy score in listings was just a great piece of additional data that helped them judge how much work a home might need if they were to purchase it. They could visualize the kitchens and the bathroom or the kitchen and the bathrooms and what it would take, expense-wise and effort-wise to make those better and what they wanted. But, they didn't really have a sense of what that meant on, the energy-related portions. And so this really became a shorthand for them, these home energy score reports, and a missing piece for them. And even when they found the house that they ended up buying and they, put an offer in like an hour after it came on the market, it didn't have a home energy score report because the seller hadn't complied and at least got it in there in time. So they thought so highly of the information and were motivated by it so much, they actually made it a requirement in their offer that the home energy score had to be provided to them within 10 days. So that they could use that information to determine if, maybe there's more work on this house than we think we can handle. And, they got the report back. It was a 5. They felt okay because it was an older home and that was average. They want to make it a 10, but that gave them the comfort to help them move forward with the deal in that case. So I'll just say, once the materials start becoming available standardly, you do improve the literacy of your community. And you can see action take place. So I wanted to share with you that actually today, in addition to the city of Portland, the city of Milwaukee, Oregon, actually they have a new policy starting today, October 1st, 2020, that all new homes listed for sale or any home listed for sale in the city of Milwaukee also has to have a home energy score report. You can see this is their new branded report that's being produced through a state home energy score system. And their local branding's on there. The state handles the supply of assessors. There's 30 assessors qualified to work in Milwaukee. The state handles the quality assurance of that. Disclosure Earth Advantage is doing the quality assurance of that work for the state. And then the local government of Milwaukee will actually be enforcing that this takes place. But there are a handful of other cities. I know this is a conversation piece in Bend as well. There are a handful of other cities in Oregon that are seriously looking at this. And I think next year you're going to see several more cities adopt this as a policy to try and educate their population, make them more literate, and enable them to more easily take action about improving homes there. And, I just wanted to share, this isn't just a topic of conversation around the importance of home performance that's just taking place in Oregon. There actually are shifts taking place across the country. And, here's a couple pieces of survey information that comes from the National Association of Realtors. For several years now, they've been surveying their membership and asking them sustainability related questions. And in this year's survey, you can see that, the majority of realtors across the entire nation, are responding that they think their residential consumers are interested or somewhat interested in sustainability. That term, that's a big shift from when I first heard the term sustainability about 25 years ago. And 70%, of residential agents, think that, promoting energy efficiency in the listings is valuable. So this is national information. I think most of us would think if this survey was done, anywhere in Oregon, that you would probably find that, Oregonian values would even align more strongly with these answers. But in addition to this kind of survey work, I wanted to point out that now the National Association of Realtors is actually taking additional steps. This is a promotion that they're working on right now with the National Association of Home Builders. It's called Home Performance Counts. They have a whole website you can go to. I'll have it linked below, but you can find resources there. A lot of those resources are national resources. Some may not be the most pertinent to our local market. I'll also at the bottom of this talk link to some local resources that are supported by Energy Trust of Oregon and Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance and are delivered through the Earth Advantage web pages. But the key here with the National Association of Realtors, I also want to get across is, they have actually had a long-standing policy since 2004 that if any locality, any local government, was thinking about having a disclosure policy like the one that was passed in Portland or the one in Austin, Texas, or the one in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and, that are now spreading around the country. If a city wanted to do that, they had it written into their policy plank that the local association had to oppose it or directed them to oppose it. Not only oppose it, but oppose that there would even be research to show whether or not such a policy would be effective. I think that was kind of a knee-jerk reaction back in 2004 to the fact that Europe had passed a mandatory policy Europe-wide. But in really positive news in my mind is NAR voted their leadership team at the end of last year to actually remove that opposition out of their policy plank. So now it is no longer the formal position of the National Association of Realtors that a disclosure policy should be opposed. It's not part of their plank, and they're actually advancing sustainability on a variety of fronts. Their own building is a very sustainable building. They have created a sustainability advisory committee that will have members from a lot of the other big committees at the National Association of Realtors. So they're really advancing things there, and I think it's important to know that because, again, in Oregon, you would think that we're always going to be a little bit ahead of what's going on with the National Association. So now that I've showed it doesn't have to be all that expensive, for some folks, like even that case we looked at there, like $6,400 for a moderate income family, like, how am I going to pay for that? I don't have cash to pay for that. I'm not going to put that on my credit card. Like, it's still too much money. So, what are the answers for that? And you look at elderly folks on fixed incomes, they might want to make some changes. How can they don't have the cash to do that as well? How is this going to happen? There are opportunities. There's some short-term loan options that can be used. There's mortgages that can be used at purchase and at refinance. So I want to tell you about those as a resource. And again, there'll be links down below as well. But those short-term kind of loans that are personal loans, unsecured loans, it's not a mortgage, right? We have some great resources in Oregon. One in particular is this on-bill financing from Craft 3. This was worked out 10 plus years ago with customers of Pacificor, PGE, Northwest Natural, that if you want to pay for an improvement like that, you can pay for improvements of up to $10,000 with a term of up to 10 years. And getting approved is very simple. They look at your history of paying your utility bill, and that shows whether you're creditworthy or not. And then the actual payment is done on your utility bill. So you should be getting savings on your utility bill, and then you have this extra payment on your utility bill. They may not necessarily net out depending on the terms and the work that you do, but it's a very simple and straightforward process. And it's especially available for folks in that moderate income level, and programs such as Energy Trust Savings Within Reach program that kicks in for folks who make more money than is allowed for the weatherization programs for low income families. But above that, they qualify and they can use this loan. Community Energy Project is another organization that does work here in Oregon, and they also can qualify people for the use of that loan. If you don't have that available to you because you're outside of those utilities territories, oftentimes local credit unions will have loans that are specifically for this purpose, and that would be a good resource to check into. So on the mortgage front, what I wanted to cover for you is that there have been some new loans that have been created in the last few years. And Fannie Mae has one called Home Style Energy Loan. Freddie Mac has their Green Choice, and then HUD has a mortgage as well. I'd say the real interesting thing here is that any Fannie or Freddie mortgage can be converted into one of these mortgages that will pay additional money without increasing the down payment towards energy efficiency features. And at the maximum level, we're talking about they'll give you an additional 15% of the as improved value of your home. That as improved value is kind of a key component here, because you have to have an appraiser who says, oh, if these energy efficiency measures are done, the house will be worth more. And that's what I'm calculating the 15% value based on. And it could be less than 15%. It just can't be more. But if you're talking about, say, a $300,000 home, that means, up to $45,000 in money could be made available. That covers more than just that low-hanging fruit. Now you really could tackle some of the bigger measures, and this can even be used to pay for solar. And it can be used when you're buying a new home, say, or a home for the first time, and you're seeing those things on a home energy score like list. Anything on that list qualifies for this lending. The folks at Fannie and Freddie have both made sure of that. If it shows up on a home energy score report, you can finance it through a mortgage with them. And it can be at the time of purchase, or it could be after the fact if you were to refinance later. And so it can be used through both mechanisms. And I will say, there is one lender you might want to keep an eye on. They're called Loan Pal. They actually offer both the short-term loans and these energy efficient mortgages from Fannie or Freddie. And they consolidate it where if you're working with a contractor that works with their loans, you can easily get that loan done very quickly. And then you can talk to them later about refinancing it. And at that point, the amount of the short-term loan simply gets wrapped into the refinance, because these mortgages are allowed to take out personal loans for energy efficiency, energy related work. Could even be solar type of work. So one key thing that I'd mentioned in there though is this as improved value that has to be done by an appraiser. That really gets us to the last myth I wanted to talk about here. And that is, so say I do all this work to my house. Well, nobody's going to pay me more for the house just because I did it. And the bank's not going to say my house is worth more just because I did it. This is something that, that family that I built that zero energy home for 17 years ago really struggled with. We couldn't get the appraiser. We couldn't get the appraiser to actually get the house to appraise out with all the added features that we had in it, and the income stream that basically was going to come from not having utility bills. That was a big lesson learned back then. And, I will say things have changed over time. Appraisal methods have been approved subsequent over the last 17 years that actually allow things like that income approach, that you can take the savings from doing energy related work on your house, consider that a stream of income, and then allow an appraiser to include that in their opinion of value of your house. whether that's work that you already did or work that you're thinking about doing for one of these loans. Now, I do want to just call a quick timeout here, because the way they do that is they actually calculate something called a net present value. I'm going to talk about this a couple more times. So the quick version of this is, if you're going to receive money over a period of time, a fixed period of time, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, net present value is the way to take the value of that stream of income over time, depreciate it by whatever an appropriate discount rate might be. You know, the rate of inflation is one, the rate of inflation minus the rate of energy price escalation is another way. But like, and then turn that into, what does this mean to me today? That whole stream of savings or income that's going to come from this type of work, for instance. So this is something bankers and appraisers are very comfortable doing, but until the last 10 years or so, they hadn't been allowed to do on residential properties. It had just been something you did on a commercial property where, say, you were changing the rent you were getting, and then that made your building worth more or less. They allowed this on the residential side, and this did make a big change. But just because they changed it didn't necessarily mean any appraisers knew about it. So in an interesting twist of fate, the appraiser that ended up doing the appraisal for that house I built back in 2003 ended up becoming so intrigued. We ended up getting one who would actually look into the green aspects. He became so intrigued that he ended up writing his own curriculum about training appraisers about those methods, got on the advisory committee for the Appraisal Foundation, which adopted those methods. And then he supplied that training to the Appraisal Institute, and then a later version of that training to Earth Advantage. And the Appraisal Institute and Earth Advantage are now the two largest suppliers of appraisal green education in the country, and have our own registries of trained and accredited appraisers from all over the country. And but the initial ball that got that rolling was that house back in 2003. So there are registries of trained appraisers. So if you have an instance where you have a project and you haven't been able to get appraisal properly done because they're not taking into account that stream of savings from the work that got done in the house, you have the right to ask for a trained, or I should say, a qualified appraiser. And one way to know about that is, you know, if they're on one of these two registries. Again, those will be connected down through the links below, so you can find out about those resources. Just covered that. And then there have been changes in the underwriting standards. So when I go back up to Fannie and Freddie, those loans that they're making available, those are key changes. It's not for every mortgage, but you can convert any Fannie or Freddie mortgage into one of those mortgages, which is a key change that's gone on about knowing that you're going to be able to get value. I think another thing that's important to realize at this point in time is what's really shifted now. This year, for the very first time, Fannie Mae bundled up a bunch of its single-family residential mortgages that were associated with high-performing homes, and they sold them off to Wall Street as a green bond. Nobody had ever done that before, and it follows a pattern that they did previously with multifamily housing. They're about 5 years behind where they are with multifamily in terms of categorizing mortgages based on how energy efficient the underlying buildings are. But just to let you know, when they did that with multifamily, once they got up and running, they became the largest green bond issuer in the world, and we're issuing $20 billion a year in bonds. I think it's a relatively safe bet that the single family residential market for them could be maybe 10 times as large in terms of how many bonds they could be selling based off the energy efficiency of the underlying housing stock. And it's kind of an overall win-win that, you know, will allow the benefits. You know, a buyer on Wall Street from an investor is going to get a benefit from, like, they're doing something sustainable. At the end of the day, it supplies better terms and opportunities for people borrowing money. I do see there's a question on the side here. Is there a push to get homes that aren't required to get home energy scores to start getting them? I will say, you know, in Portland, where it's mandatory, They were following up with folks during COVID. They have totally backed off on that enforcement, but now starting to beginning the next year, that's going to start up again. Milwaukee is not providing any honeymoon period at all. They're going to be following up on every single listing that doesn't have a home energy score in it, and sending out enforcement communications. And another question on what are some good financing options for traditional homes that aren't financeable for HUD or Fannie or Freddie. Non-traditional homes, if it's manufactured housing, I actually have some links at the end of this slide, which will slide deck, which will touch on that, and I think are good resources. And I especially point them out, especially for Southern Oregon, which just lost so many thousands of manufactured homes. There's a couple other key points to touch on before we wrap up in the next couple minutes. Just want to say, there are a few things that have not totally changed yet. One, appraisers will tell you it can still be hard to find comps. Earth Advantage has spent a lot of time over the last 4 years, building out a whole data system called the Green Building Registry. It's a national system. We're trying to aggregate all of the third-party verified green building information in the country, whether that's ratings like home energy scores or HERS ratings, or certifications like LEED or Earth Advantage. Through that system, you can find, and you can actually zero in and find only homes of a certain level of performance or a certain type of certification, making it really helpful, say, if you are an appraiser trying to find comps within the system. And then on the back end, this tool is really a data service. And we flow data right into RMLS, for instance, and then they flow it to Redfin, Zillow, HomeSnap, Realtor.com. And so by getting the data in here, then it immediately flows out and is flowing into all the different places that people find that information. And this is actually new news. I'm going to show that, like, right now, we just started producing this report, which is a standard report from the Appraisal Institute, an addendum that anyone can provide to an appraiser that puts a standard format to energy-related information. We're now auto-populating that for every single home that has a record in the Green Building Registry. And it's a report that can be downloaded and provided to an appraiser, or just the link provided to an appraiser, or the appraiser can find it themselves if they're self-motivated. But a key element here is, at the moment, you don't have a savings number filled in sort of the top middle of the blown up section. And that's been a problem for a very long time. That's disabled the capacity to have energy performance consideration for every single home in the United States. Is there isn't a piece of data for every single home in the United States. We now have worked with, we talked about the MBS already, so I'm going to move on from that. We have been working on a way to create a reference energy cost estimate number for every single home in the United States in order to get beyond this question of scale ability, so that energy performance can be placed within every single mortgage consideration in the country, every single underwriting process, every single appraisal. So, there was a call for this 10 years ago through the SAVE Act. It didn't pass. The appraisal addendum has asked for this for 10 plus years. There's never been a source for it. We have worked with the U.S. Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Lab. They have systems. They've created now a service that will take a lot of data, and they've pre-modeled it all. And at the end of the day, they're producing a comparable reference energy cost estimate for every single house in the United States that we're embedding into the Green Building Registry and combining it with local fuel prices. So we're not using an average fuel price for the state. We're using what is local with your utility. With the concept that now, once that you have this energy cost and reference, you can say, hey, I have this house that is a 5. That's an old home. And that's pretty good. But what does that mean in terms of dollars and cents? This tool is going to say, oh, that old home, if you hadn't done anything to it, we would expect the energy cost to be $2,000 a year. But now you got a home energy score for that home. It's verified by a third party that you did stuff. And the estimate is that it's only using $1,500 a year. There is now an income stream of $500 a year that can be automatically utilized by appraisers and lenders, and even straight into the underwriting software. And the final slide that I have is, other than the resource slides, is just, does anything I've talked about today even matter in terms of providing information for people so people can do something. And these are a couple papers, research papers that were published last year. I think in the final moment I have, I'll stress the one on the left more. This was 3 economists did a research of the disclosure policy in the city of Austin, which went live in 2009. That policy requires an energy audit, not before a home gets listed, just after the offer has been accepted, but during the mandatory waiting period they have there. It's kind of like a home inspection, but it's like an energy home inspection. And just that, even though it's not in the listing up front, so people can't react to it in advance if you're a buyer. And it doesn't show as much like delineation of improvement or dollars and savings and all that, but just a relatively simple report of like, here's stuff that needs to be sort of fixed from an energy standpoint. They've shown, because they have over 100,000 sales to analyze there, they've shown that from the lowest performing to the highest performing, the market does seem to be valuing the highest performing homes 8% higher than the lowest performing homes, controlling for all other factors in there. And so that's a pretty key finding. That also it goes along with the fact that in that market, they were able to show that buyers are actually doing more work now that they've been informed after they bought the place than they would otherwise, more than the neighboring towns, more than they did previously. And interestingly, sellers are doing more as well, because they know this is going to be part and parcel of the sales process in Austin. Sellers are actually taking more action in the 2 years before they sell. Same way you paint your house and you clean up the yard and all that. Like once you know there's literacy in your marketplace, you're going to put this on the list of things I got to take care of before I sell the house. And there's a similar piece of research being worked on in Portland right now by a different PhD candidate for her economics PhD. It's not published yet, but I can tell you, I mean, the findings are very, very similar in that, and maybe just in different in one little way, I'll say low performing homes all kind of sit in a bubble of low performing homes. But as you start to work out of that, you get to a 5, a 6, a 7, an 8, a 9. People can differentiate, it seems like what the data is saying. And they start, it's at that level, they start rewarding those homes with some premiums in what they're willing to pay. Everything that's sort of caught in that low performing bottom third it doesn't seem like there's a lot of differentiation between a 1 and a 3. But if you can move out of that and be average or above, it does seem like the market here is really reacting to that. And we're really hopeful to be able to see, hopefully that research get published this year, so we'll be able to share it, you know, in venues like this. So these are the resources I was talking about, this slide. And then this final slide does have resources around manufactured homes, because both Fannie and Freddie do have manufactured home lending products now, that if the home gets built in a certain way that makes it a higher quality home, and a little part of that is energy efficiency, but there are some other key elements as well, you can actually qualify for these loans, which will treat the manufactured home as real property. And you're allowed to use stick-built homes as comps for appraisals. This is a huge shift for manufactured housing. So I would encourage anybody that is that might even know anyone who's involved in the work in Southern Oregon and trying to figure out how we're going to rebuild all this manufactured housing stock, using these as a resource, that if we can build back a little better in terms of meeting these criteria, the value that's going to bring to the owners of those properties over time is going to be huge. Because instead of owning a depreciating asset, they're going to have the chance to own an appreciating asset. And so that's why I wanted to share those with you today. So sorry I didn't leave much room for time. We're basically right at the hour. And I see that there were a couple other questions here. Oh, another one from Jennifer Taylor. It says, not all homes in Portland are required to get an HES, like a floating home. Yeah, like the national methodology that's used doesn't have a basement that is water. So we haven't been able to do that one. We've asked them about it, so we'll see if that happens. And then, can this system, Energy Score, work with Sun Number that is working with Zillow? You know, the long-term goal is this standardly becomes part of Zillow. And, you know, right now, wherever this becomes a mandatory disclosure, Zillow is adding it into their feed. They're not doing it anywhere it's voluntary. They're only doing it where it's mandatory. I think that's just a really key difference, because when it's voluntary, you'd like to think that the top performers are going to advertise as much as they possibly can. But another key finding of that Austin study was voluntary programs will not change the market, because in their opinion, even the owners of better performing homes who are going to sell them just don't know what they have to sell. They are not literate enough to actually take advantage of what they have and market it. And if the best performing homes don't get marketed, the whole market won't unravel with the next best advertising and the next best advertising. So it's really the way to get over this literacy issue. Does seem, in their opinion, in that article, they said it actually requires intervention in the market to sort of.
Well, David, we know that from climate policy, it's true of almost everything. Voluntary measures are just highly ineffective. We have another couple of questions. It's been a very engaged audience, and one of them is folks in Bend tried to work on a home energy score here, and the Board of Realtors really opposed it. And their reason, one of the reasons, was that it would have an effect on equity. So I guess this is a twofold question, seeing as how we're at the top of the hour. What do you recommend to help get folks, get the realtors on board here? And what are the effects on equity?
Yeah, I think, one thing that I would go back to with the local board is I think they were reflecting the opinions that NAR had broadcast to their membership for 16 years. So NAR had strongly broadcast, the National Association of Realtors had strongly broadcast to every local association in this country, if someone tries to have a disclosure policy in your area, you must fight it. That is not the message from the National Association anymore. National Association. They had changed their tune. They no longer have the instruction that you have to fight this. They're basically saying you can have an open mind to this, and your job is actually, part of your job is to think about the sustainability of your community and the future of it. And when we talk about equity, I think what we've seen, what they typically say, what somebody who doesn't want to see this happen will say, hey, you're going to depreciate the only asset of somebody who's about to retire. And they're going to lose that one asset that they've had because you're going to devalue their home. And I think a strong argument against that is, from the research we're seeing, that if they do have a lower performing home, that sort of whole group of lower performing homes, we're really not seeing them get discounted. People are just saying, yeah, these are bad performing homes. That, there's not a big difference you're seeing in value there, because they're already getting discounted. Typically those lower homes that might have bad performance or something, there's something else going on that's causing a discount to happen. And then if somebody has taken action, even themselves, if they insulated the attic themselves, this actually rewards them for hard work they might have done themselves on their house. And otherwise, if this information is not widely available, basically mandatory, you've blocked them, honestly, from the chance of their house being able to be compared to other homes. And I would say even a bigger thing is, when we talked about how you're going to finance all this stuff, the only way these loans really work well is if you've got a lot of this information available in a marketplace. I'll tell you, we work directly with the folks at Fannie and Freddie Mae, and they want to hear from us every single time a new policy goes into effect, because to them, that's another market where they can go make these loans well known. And the major benefactor of these loans are people who are on the edge financially. Maybe they can barely afford the house. How are they going to make any improvements to that house they can barely afford? So that's, if you really delve into it, there's actually a lot of benefit there for the folks who you might view at risk. And I don't think there's actually a lot of downside.